listener production.
Hello, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Most Australians would be somewhat, if not very familiar, with the online retailer Temu. The internet marketplace, selling everything from t-shirts to toilets, ships its super cheap goods straight from China, with more than 1.2 million Aussies using it every month. Amid the cost of living crisis and our love of a bargain, the popularity of these sites is on track to continue. But what is the human and environmental cost of super cheap retailers? And what responsibility should we be exercising when it comes to fast fashion and fast everything else?
The global fashion industry relies on a system of entrenched exploitation. We know that workers are working incredibly long hours in potentially unsafe conditions to make the items of clothing that you're wearing right now.
That chat coming up after the headlines, so let's get into it with Helen Smith. It is Monday, the 27th of May.
Morning, Sasha. We start with Papua New Guinea, where the UN fears more than 670 people are dead following Friday's landslide. The disaster hit the country's remote highlands, with the International Organisation for Migration in the country saying the scale of destruction is much greater than first thought. More than 150 houses are feared to have been buried in the landslide, while more than 1,200 survivors have been evacuated from nearby areas due to unstable ground.
The land continues to slide, and this, coupled with the heavy bulk of soil that had already landed earlier, is putting a pressure on the surrounding houses, hence the evacuation of those.
That was the Chief of Missions, Sirhan Akhtarprak, speaking to the ABC there. Some locals have taken to digging at the rubble with their bare hands, desperate to find survivors. So far, only 6 bodies have been recovered. The UN, government agencies, police and military personnel are assisting with the recovery. Now, I did have a look to see if Australia has sent forth any additional aid or personnel in the wake of this tragedy. Foreign Minister Penny Wong did tweet her sympathies on Friday, saying Australia was ready to help if necessary, but it doesn't look like we've sent anything additional over so far.
Western Australia's Premier Roger Cook has spoken out about the double murder-suicide of a mother and daughter in Perth, describing it as chilling and horrific. 59-year-old Jennifer Patel-Chick and 18-year-old Gretel were shot dead by Mark Bombara on Friday afternoon. He had been searching for his ex-wife. Now, she was friends with Jennifer and was believed to be staying with the mother and daughter at the property. The 63-year-old gunman shot both women before taking his own life, with police in attendance on the street at the time of the final gunshot. Family and friends have laid flowers at their home, remembering Jennifer and Gretel for always thinking about other people.
Yeah, now WA police have said the incident was technically not a domestic violence matter, as the victims and gunmen were not related. But the WA Premier did say more needs to be done to combat family violence, calling it a society-wide issue. And this obviously represents another woman, 2 more women killed by a man in Australia this year. If you're listening to this and you need any assistance, you can call 1-800-RESPECT or visit their website. Hamas has launched rockets towards Tel Aviv, setting off air raid sirens for the first time in months. Israel Defense Forces said at least 8 projectiles crossed into Israel from the Rafah area, with several of them being intercepted. Hamas posted on its Telegram channel saying the rockets were fired into Israel in response to what it called, quote, Zionist massacres against civilians. So far, there haven't been any reports of casualties. Now, the reason that most rockets shot at Israel from Gaza don't land is because of what's called the Iron Dome. Now, this uses radar to detect and intercept short-range rockets, missiles and drones. And so it's optimised for destroying these small, slow, unguided targets like these short-range rockets and drones. It has been operational since 2011. And it was developed in response to the 2006 war, we have been here before, that ended with Hamas taking control of Gaza the following year. So you might hear of airstrikes happening aimed towards Israel. Most of them, and we saw the same when Iran launched its attack in April, they are stopped by what's called the Iron Dome.
Yeah, and it comes as we enter now nearly 7 months since October 7 last year, with more than 35,000 Palestinians being killed. This attack did take place ahead of further ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas, which are expected to resume next week. And he's grown accustomed to almost cult-like adoration when he speaks at rallies, but Donald Trump has been hit by boos and jeers while attending the Libertarian National Convention.
The Libertarian Party should nominate Trump for President of the United States. Whoa. That's nice. That's nice. Maybe you don't want to win. Keep getting your 3% every 4 years.
The presumptive Republican president nominee is trying to win support from fringe parties, which will be crucial in the swing states on election day.
Yeah, the Libertarian vote makes up about 3% of the overall picture. But as you said, he's trying to win over those crucial little bits that could help him gain ground on the vote day in November. So the Libertarians believe in small government and personal freedom. So they're kind of have policy beliefs on both sides. They're more right-wing when it comes to economic policy, but they lean left when it comes to social issues. It's worth noting there was a small core of MAGA voters in the crowd. They had their red hats on. They were chanting USA, USA, but they were just drowned out by the rest of the crowd. We saw someone unfurl a Palestinian flag. One person was holding up a sign that said, "No wannabe dictators." They were dragged away by security. As we heard in that grab as well, instead of kind of trying to be gracious and you know, he could hear this response, and rather than try to win them over with policy or, you know, assuring them that he was going to be great for them, he just started taunting them and saying, well, you enjoy your 3% vote. Like, come on, Donald, you're trying to win these people's votes and you're just taunting them from the stage. It's pretty typical of Trump, I reckon.
Yeah, definitely. Look, it doesn't sound like he's worrying about much then, but I guess we just have to keep following and see what happens on election day.
Yeah, well, still a few months away. We've got plenty more left to watch. Helen, thanks so much for being here for the headlines. Next up, it's our deep dive on online retailer Temu and looking at the human and environmental costs of super cheap retailers. Online juggernaut Temu is Australia's most popular free app, offering a vast vortex of low-cost merchandise from fashion and homewares to toys and electronics. Who could resist the call to shop like a billionaire? And adding to the allure are games to win discounts or coupons, personalised recommendations for you, and free shipping from China. But amid all the thrilling rush of retail therapy lie some pretty serious questions. Where does this stuff come from? What are the conditions like for those at the bottom of the supply chain? And with everything wrapped in plastic and racking up serious air miles, what about the environment? Today I'm joined by Sarah Rogan. She's the campaigns and advocacy lead at Oxfam Australia. Sarah, thanks for your time today. Look, Temu has become hugely popular in Australia. We're well known for loving a bargain. Cost of living isn't helping either. You know, people need to buy stuff, I get it. But there are ethical concerns, and that is around the potential exploitation of the workers for Temu in China. What do we actually know about the conditions for factory workers who are part of the supply line?
The global fashion industry relies on a system of entrenched exploitation. We know that workers are working incredibly long hours in potentially unsafe conditions to make the items of clothing that you're wearing right now. Fast fashion has become a part of the regular way that people consume clothes, and we know that the workers are mainly not paid enough to live on. They're not paid enough to meet their daily needs for a decent life. Things like being able to afford rent, food, going to the doctor when they need to, all these sorts of things are not possible under the system of exploitation that workers face because they are not paid a living wage.
We're talking about Temu in this case, you know, workers in China, but Temu's not alone, right? There are so many other brands that are participating in questionable ethical practices, aren't there?
Yeah, that's right. Brands like Temu and Shein are part of a model of ultra fast fashion, which just churns through things so incredibly quickly. And we know a lot about fast fashion. We're quite familiar with that. But what we're seeing with these other brands is just things happening so quickly. And you've really got to question what's happening with the workers when they're being exposed to such need for things so quickly. But there are many brands that we've been watching for quite a few years. We've been involved with conversations with them about trying to do better within their supply chains. And we are seeing some improvements. There are brands that genuinely want to do better, but it's part of a huge system globally of questionable purchasing practices, of a lack of transparency, and of brands who are not yet paying living wages.
We know this as consumers, I suppose, at a base level. I'm sure there are some consumers out there who are perfectly oblivious to what goes on when it comes to making and receiving their clothes. But last week we did see this footage kind of go viral, and it's unverified, but the poster claims it's from a Temu factory in China. It shows this line of shirtless men at conveyor belts frantically rushing through these packages that are just in their thousands, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them piled on top of each other. It's pretty shocking, and I suppose it made a lot of people stop and think about how they could be contributing to that, whether they're shopping at Temu or somewhere else. What impact do you think footage like that has when things like that go viral? Does that impact consumer behaviour at all?
It does, for sure. We know that consumers are concerned about where and how their clothes are being made and how the people, mainly women who make their clothes, are being treated. We've been having conversations with consumers for many years now, and we know that brands care about what their customers think. And we really encourage people to be conscious consumers. We don't want them to feel guilty about where they shop from or buying from the brands that they love, but we want to see people using their power as consumers to demand brands do better. There are many ways that people can demand that brands do better. They particularly pay attention to what's going on their social media feeds. And so brands do listen to what consumers have to say. And also, it's been 11 years since the Rana Plaza factory collapsed, and we really did see a change in consumer behaviour, or at least awareness about what's going on in the fast fashion industry after that tragedy 11 years ago. And things improved in factories, particularly in Bangladesh.
What about the environmental impact as well? I mean, not much of what we buy is made in Australia, especially fast fashion. What environmental impact does that have when it's all this plastic, it's all this packaging, then it's being put on a plane and shipped across the world, and then it's being put in a truck and driven around? Like, the carbon footprint of this industry must be ginormous.
That's a good way to put it. The carbon footprint is enormous. It's one of the most polluting industries in the world. We see the whole cycle of fast fashion from the dyeing mills to the cotton spinning right through to being thrown out so quickly and dumped in places like desert in Chile or in Ghana.
You know, you say that consumers, especially in the last decade, have been more focused on buying ethically, trying their best to get their clothes and their goods from ethical sources. However, a lot of that relies on transparency from those companies themselves. What work is being undertaken to ensure that companies like Temu and Shein and others are being transparent with how their supply line works?
Transparency is hugely important in the garment sector. And when we're talking about transparency, that's about naming the names and locations of their supplier factories. And so that's publishing on their website all of the factories where they source their clothes from. And this transparency allows for independent auditors, for trade unions to be able to know where the factories are, conduct their inspections, to be able to talk directly to workers so that they can know what's going on in the factories. We've been calling on Australian brands to be transparent for a number of years now. And of the 19 or so companies that we're watching, the majority of them are transparent. And that's sort of happened within the last 10 or so years. And that's hugely encouraging. That's brands like Kmart, Cotton On, Best and Less, those Australian brands, and also some of the international brands like H&M. They do publish the names and locations of their supplier factories on their website. This is a building block to work towards being an ethical brand, a building block to working working towards living wages as well. And the brands that have released the names and locations of their supplier factories have predominantly done that for tier 1, which is where the clothes are made. And then there's other tiers within the supply chains as well, like the cotton mills, the dyeing factories. That's the next step in the process, and we're calling on brands to do that as well.
What about in China? We know it's hard to get information from Chinese companies and factories. Temu and Shein operate out of China. Are they showing any indication that they want to be more transparent?
With China, it's what we don't know that's the problem. We see media reports and investigations that come out that are often undercover, they're unverified. It adds to our knowledge about what's going on, but we can't independently verify it. But what we do know is that China has a long way to go when it comes to respecting the rights of working people. China hasn't signed really important human rights conventions. For example, they haven't signed the International Labour Organization's core conventions on forced labour, on protecting people's rights to bargain together in their workplaces, or the right to join and form a union. So the right to freedom of association is severely curtailed in China.
Temu says its values include integrity and being socially responsible. Does that really mean anything in this case?
I can't comment directly on Temu, but what I can speak to is the brands that we're looking at, I believe, are really trying to do the right thing. Some of them are restricted by the system, and so what needs to change is how brands are doing their business, how they're doing their purchasing practices, which is how they go about negotiating with the factories to deliver on the products. What we want brands to do is to separate the costs of labour from the costs of doing business. So when they're negotiating with factories on delivering a particular product, actually ring-fencing wages from that discussion. So the wages component is not compromised when trying to get brand factories to deliver products quickly.
Look, before we let you go, Sarah, we're talking about consumer responsibility as well. Should we consider boycotting companies like this that don't want to be transparent, that we know that there are ethical questions, very serious ethical questions around their practices? Does boycotting work? Is that something we should consider?
With specific reference to the fashion industry or the garment sector, we don't advocate boycotts. They may result in workers losing their jobs. The garment industry is a huge part of the economy in the countries where the clothes are made, and we actually want this to remain the case. We want women to have that empowerment of being able to work, and being paid in the garment sector is the way that can happen. What we'd love consumers to do is use their voices as consumers to demand that the brands they love do better, and really continue on their journey to paying workers a living wage.
I do my very best not to buy from non-ethical sources, and something like Temu and Shein I've avoided just because for me there are more questions than answers, and I don't feel comfortable supporting a brand like that. Does that mean that it would actually be not better, but is it almost better for me to be shopping there so that I'm in some way actually supporting jobs for these women overseas?
What we'd like people to do is look at the brands on Oxfam's What She Makes company tracker. You can see how brands are tracking on their transparency, on their commitment to a living wage, on whether they've done other things like separating those labour costs, or whether they've investigated what the current wage is and the difference between a living wage, and whether they're making a plan to bridge that gap. We want people to be conscious consumers. Absolutely only buy things from op shops if that's the way that you want to buy your clothes. But then we know that the vast majority of people will walk into a store or see something online which is pretty cheap, and that's their price point. That's what they can afford. And so we're not discouraging people from doing that. What we're encouraging is people to look a little bit deeper into what's going on in the supply chains of the brands that they love or the brands they shop from. And they can do that by Googling What She Makes. And there's a list of the brands that we're looking at, and then you can see how they're tracking on the What She Makes website.
Sarah Rogan, thanks so much for joining us today and for talking us through that topic. Definitely a complicated one, but it seems like we've made some good strides, but lots of work left to be done.
That's exactly right. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this morning's briefing. That is all for this episode, but we will be back this afternoon with a part 2 in our look at Temu, analysing their marketing strategy, their algorithms, how they use AI, and how that gets us spending more money with them. Before you go, we would love it if you could share this app with someone you think might enjoy it. And if you want to keep up with our video content, you can check us out on Instagram. We're at The Briefing Podcast. We're also on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. I'm Sasha Barbagat. See you next time.
Listener.